So tonight we are going to discuss the options that Massachusetts voters have for casting their ballots, and we're going to answer your questions, particularly about mail-in voting. We'll also explore efforts to mobilize voters, especially young people, and we're going to learn about ballot question number 2, which proposes a new way to conduct our elections going forward using ranked choice voting. So to lead us through this discussion, we have a fantastic panel of experts, and I'm very grateful to them for making time for us this evening. The plan is that I'll introduce each panelist in turn, and they will share some brief opening remarks. Then we will turn to your questions. As you know, please type any questions you have for me or for one of our panelists into the Facebook comments, and we will try to answer all the questions we can tonight. We're planning to go about an hour, but if there are more questions and more information you'd like our experts to share, we will go go a bit longer. All right, so let's dive right in. It's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Pam Wilmot. Pam is the Vice President of State Operations for Common Cause, and she previously served as the Executive Director of Common Cause Massachusetts, where I had the pleasure of working with her on a number of different pieces of legislation. She is a widely recognized expert in Massachusetts and around the country on elections and voting, the Electoral College, campaign finance, as well as government ethics and transparency. Pam is also director of the National Popular Vote Initiative at Common Cause. So Pam, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Great to be here, Jason.
Thank
you, Senator.
You bet. Perhaps you could get us started by describing the options that are available for voters in Massachusetts to cast their ballots in this upcoming election, and address, some of the common questions and concerns that typically come up about mail-in voting in particular.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's been a pleasure to work with you to actually reform voting for the pandemic this fall and really work to provide voters with as many options as possible. And I think that people are pretty well aware that a lot has changed, not just in our regular lives, but also in how you cast a ballot. This fall, when we had our primary, we had record participation. And I credit the new law that you helped pass and were a big advocate for, and of course, Common Cause and our coalition partners helped to write and to advocate for along the way. With that record turnout, 1.7 million people cast a ballot, and about 900,000 of those were by mail. Our previous record in vote by mail was only a fraction of that, at about 3% of those cast as opposed to half. The 1.7 million was the highest absolute number of ballots we've ever seen cast in a ballot, and by percentage, a 30-year high. It also was a record, if you compare it to 2016, which is a primary before a presidential election. Those are a little different than a gubernatorial primary, where more people are involved. In a presidential year, we have a couple of different primaries. We have the presidential and then the state one. So people tend to peter out their voting energy and wait for the general. It was 4.5 times. So about 380,000 voted in 2016. That's an astounding change. So people have essentially 3 different options of how to vote. You can vote by mail, and already over 1 million people have, I think it's 1.2 million people have already requested an absentee ballot for the November election. Absentee ballot and vote by mail ballot or early voting ballot are essentially the same for the purposes of the audience. When you got that form from the Secretary of State, either in July or right after the primary election, you filled it out. That entitles you, and you should be getting a mail ballot from your city or town very soon. So that's one option if you want to be socially distant and to protect yourself from extra exposure. You can also mail, and one of our things that we encourage everyone to do is to mail that ballot back as soon as you get it. Fill it out and then send it in. Alternatively, one can vote at an early voting location. We have early voting going from October 17th through the 30th. And many cities and towns are really just doing this at their own city or town hall or some other location. Only a few are doing multiple locations. And if they do that, it tends to be on the weekends where there are more sites available. Go to your city or town website to look where those are up. Or there also are a number of things on the Secretary of State's website in order to see where you can vote early. There's lots of different tools now. The third option, of course, is to vote on election day. And we do expect that the lines will be considerably shorter this year than they typically are in a presidential year. We've been working with election officials to recruit poll monitors. Currently, there is not a shortage of poll workers, and we've provided and trained a number of college students and young people, and they're sort of standing by to fill in should there be some shortage at the last minute. But all poll workers will have PPE so that you will be safe, or at least as safe as possible if you do go in and vote in person. There's a few other little nuances on voting this time around that I'd like to cover around vote by mail. One, you can mail your ballot back, and that is postage paid. Two, there are drop boxes in many communities. You can check that out either on your local website or on the Secretary of State's website. And those drop boxes are secure. They do not go through the Postal Service, so you don't have to worry about any delays. When you put it in, it is good. And you can actually, we encourage people to mail their ballot as soon as possible, but mail ballots for this election only will be counted if they're received up to Friday after the election. So that was something that we thought was important given the delays in the Postal Service. We are experiencing huge delays in postal delivery because of the funding of the Postal Service, removing certain kinds of equipment, and some of those changes have been reversed, but we thought it was important to give voters even more choices in this very, very important election. One question that comes up a lot is, if I have requested an absentee ballot and I don't get it, can I go in person and vote? And the answer is yes. If you have requested a ballot and you haven't sent it back, you can go and vote in person, either early or during on election day. And you can check on the Secretary of website, Track My Ballot, to see whether you have ballot has been processed if you have sent it back. And sometimes that seems to take a long time, but if they have not actually, if you mailed it super late, and you're worried, you can go look at it. But really, people should really only go and vote in person if they haven't sent it back. So lots of options for voters this year. It was a huge success. I am personally expecting a record turnout in this election. I think we will blow out any other election in Massachusetts heretofore, at least in terms of absolute numbers, if not from percentages. And there's really no excuse in terms of making your voice heard in this most important election in our lifetime.
Thank you so much, Pam. That was a great overview. And, it's such good news that we're seeing this kind of turnout because, obviously when we first went into the pandemic, we were very concerned that we would have low turnout as a result of people understandably being concerned about going out to vote. So the fact that we were able to pass this legislation, and kudos to Common Cause and Mass Vote and ACLU and other organizations that really worked hard, to educate the public and legislators, and the fact that we were able to pass this and create these new options is terrific news. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion about continuing mail-in voting, even after 2020, when hopefully the pandemic's behind us, assuming we continue to have success with it. So
yeah, that's something we will certainly be advocating for. I think that it was very popular, and it did show that when you give people the option to vote and make it so that it isn't difficult, they will do it. And vote by mail certainly accomplishes that goal, and it's secure, it's safe, and it's definitely what we need to be moving toward. Massachusetts is actually one of way behind in terms of our vote by mail laws. So we've had a ways to catch up.
Good. Well, we will circle back, no doubt, through this evening's conversation, I'm sure, and talk some more about this upcoming election and mail-in voting and other topics like that. Great. So now I'm thrilled to introduce our next panelist, who is Amanda Westlake. Amanda is a sophomore at Tufts University, where she's majoring in political science. She was a field organizer for Senator Ed Markey's reelection campaign this past summer, and she co-founded Students for Markey, which is a student-led group focused on turning out the youth vote. She also previously interned for Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign. While Amanda was a student at Wakefield High School, which is where I had the pleasure of first meeting her and getting to know her, she served as the chair of the Massachusetts High School Democrats. So Amanda, thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's great to see you again. I think nobody would disagree that young people have a lot at stake in this election, not the least of which is the future of our planet. So, and yet, young people historically vote at much lower rates than do older people. So, question to you is, why do you think that this is the case? And what is being done to engage and mobilize young people to participate in this very important upcoming election?
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Senator Lewis, and I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, to your question, yes, it is a fact that young people don't vote as much, and they vote at much lower rates than other age groups in Massachusetts and across the country. And historically, that's been the case for a while. And I think there are two main reasons why young people don't vote. First of all, it can be really difficult to figure out all the logistics of voting, to register to vote. There are voter registration deadlines. The process can be confusing. And it's just hard to also sometimes get information about the candidates and who's running and make an informed decision. And specifically, that also impacts like low-income young people and young people of color, or even more. And for college students too, like as a college student, it can be difficult to figure out where I should send my ballot, if I should register at home or at school. Like sometimes the mail services at a college campus can be slow to get a mail-in ballot. And so all of those things make it much more difficult for young people to actually figure out how to vote and then vote. And second of all, young people might not be motivated to vote and because maybe they haven't seen the impact that their vote can have, or they haven't seen politicians talk about the issues that they care about, or see the results of an election and actually have that election them kind of move towards the policies that that young people that matter to young people. And so like young people and students live in this world that's being defined by a climate crisis and a global pandemic and white supremacy and racial violence. And voting is really important, but it hasn't always been what everyone sees as the answer because it hasn't been presented as a clear solution. And so what I think campaigns can do to reach young people, first of all, you just really have to meet young people where they're at. And so that means digital organizing, using social media, doing text banking and phone banking, and using relational organizing strategies, which can be really effective for young people. Also hiring and paying young people for their work and paid internships and other roles, and giving them opportunities that actually recognize their skills. And I think young people are some of the best organizers around. They understand technology and digital tools and how to talk to other young people. And they've done really incredible organizing here in Massachusetts, both in political campaigns, in advocacy and activism work. And so campaigns really should be listening to young people about the issues that they care about and paying attention and taking their feedback and thoughts seriously. And I also think that campaigns should have focus on having policies that young people support. And so I think that overall young people are much more policy focused than most people give them credit for. There can be a tendency to think, like young people only care about TikTok and that's what will get them to vote. But I really don't think that that's the case. I think that they understand, or we understand what's at stake with the world and kind of the changes that need to be made to make the world like we think it should be. Things like environmental policies, healthcare policies, things that are really, really pressing. And when campaigns emphasize those things with really clear messaging, and candidates actually support the policies that young people support, then that is like the single most important thing to actually getting young people to vote and support the campaign. And that can also go with things like memes and funny videos and like fun digital strategies. But if you just take like the fun digital strategies without any of the substantial policy platform, then that's not as effective.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was just terrific, and I'm so proud to represent you as my constituent, and I'm so grateful, for all the work that you've been doing for years now to encourage, civic engagement and participation from young people. Certainly voting, but going beyond that to really get involved in campaigns and contribute in so many different ways. And the future is in good hands with you. So thank you. We will circle back again to discuss some of these issues in more depth. Okay, so I'm going to now welcome and introduce our third and final panelist, Evan Falchuk. Evan is the chair of the Yes on 2 campaign, which supports ranked choice voting. In 2014, Evan founded a new political party and ran for governor of Massachusetts. He has also had a long and accomplished career as an entrepreneur and an executive, mostly in the healthcare industry. So Evan, it's a pleasure to have you joining us tonight. And by way of sort of kicking things off for you, let me just make sure our audience is aware that there are two, in addition to obviously voting for candidates, all the way from president to our state legislature in this election, there are also 2 ballot questions. The first has to do with how we service cars and trucks. We won't really be dealing with that ballot question this evening, perhaps another time. But the second ballot question has to do with ranked choice voting, which, if approved by voters, would change the way that we conduct certain elections in Massachusetts going forward. And it would make Massachusetts the second state after Maine to adopt ranked choice voting. So Evan, over to you. Maybe you could help us better understand what ranked choice voting is for those who are not yet that familiar with it, and why you believe that it would strengthen our democracy.
Absolutely, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here. Question 2 is the culmination of years of work by volunteers and other organizers around the Commonwealth to improve our democracy by implementing ranked choice voting. The reason why we need ranked choice voting is that so many voters and so many Americans report that when they're voting, they feel like they have to hold their nose sometimes and vote for a candidate that they're okay with in order to make sure that someone that they're not okay with wins. Voters say it all the time. I'm going to pick between the lesser of two evils, or they see the division that's inherent in our politics and they want that to change. And ranked choice voting helps fix that problem. So here's how it works. When you have an election with multiple candidates, so more than two, today you pick one candidate. So the 4th congressional district race, which just happened, there were 9 great candidates, and the winner ended up with 22% of the vote. That's not to say that any of those candidates aren't good. And in fact, Jake Auchincloss, who won, is a big supporter of ranked choice voting. But it's better if a winner has a majority. And that's what ranked choice voting solves. So in a race like that, you would rank your candidates first, second, third, and so on. And in the first counting, if no one had a majority of the vote, you eliminate the last place finisher. And as a voter, if you voted for that last place candidate, now your second choice counts. And we redistribute the votes. And if no one has 50%, you do that again. But if they do, now you've got a winner, and you've got a winner that represents the will of the majority of voters in the district. It's a big upgrade. The two things I want to mention about it that are really critical is that it really changes the way people run races. You know, today in our current system, if you're campaigning, and I remember this when I was running, if I was knocking on doors back when we were allowed to do that before the pandemic, and there was a sign outside of an opposing candidate, there's no reason to go knock on that door. It's not worth it. There's nothing there for you. But in a ranked choice election, you'll go knock on that door and you'll ask that voter, how can we agree on some issues? Because as a candidate, you want that voter to think of you as their second choice. And in fact, in places where ranked choice voting is being used, you see candidates cross-endorsing each other, opponents cross-endorsing each other. How much better would our politics be if instead of seeing candidates trying to beat each other over the head with every issue under the sun, they instead said, you know, we agree on the following 5 issues. And so if you don't want to pick my opponent, consider me as your second choice. That's a big change. And in the places where it's been used, people like it. They find it simple. They find it easy. It's quite popular. We have endorsers all across the political spectrum for question 2. They include Democrats like former Governor Patrick, Republicans like former Governor Weld. We have Senator Warren, Attorney General Healy, former Republican Lieutenant Governor Kerry Murphy Healy, and former Senate candidate Gabriel Gomez. Great organizations, Common Cause and Mass Vote, and so many others. But at the end of the day, this is about the thousands of volunteers and the millions of voters in Massachusetts, giving them choice, giving them a greater voice, and helping voters vote their hopes and not their fears. So I look forward to further discussion on this, but I hope everybody here will join me in voting yes on question 2.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Evan, for that very helpful overview. And, you know, I'm sure we will, based on some questions that the audience have and that I may have as well, I'm sure we'll dive in a bit further. Great. So we're now at a point where we would love to take questions and feedback from our audience. So please go ahead and feel free to just type into the Facebook comments, you know, anything, questions you have for any of our panelists or anything you want to share with us. And Tom Dalton from my office, and thank you so much, Tom, for your help with organizing the event tonight, as well as Emily Graniff. Tom's also going to continue to post, you know, helpful links, including the Secretary of State's website, how to track your ballot, and other things, you know, helpful information for folks. So Tom, over to you. Do we have some questions coming in? All right, great. From Heidi DiLeo. Thanks, Heidi. I think you are probably asking here about ranked choice voting, I'm assuming, in terms of how long it takes to get the results and, you know, if there's a cost to implement it. And I'm assuming in terms of how long it takes to get the results, because of, as Evan described it, if no candidate has the majority, right, then you would go through the process of reassigning their second choice, second place vote, and so on. So over to you, Evan. Maybe you can take this question.
Yeah, these are great questions. So we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years talking to both Secretary Galvin and his office. And by the way, Secretary Galvin has endorsed ranked choice voting to make sure that there's a good understanding of how this works, and also with clerks all across the Commonwealth. And I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in their ability to do this quickly and efficiently. The actual counting process itself takes seconds. I mean, it's a computerized system with bubbles, and the ballots are scanned into the machines, and the machines that we have by and large in the Commonwealth are able to handle ranked choice voting in their current state. There may be a bit of a process after the initial count to transfer memory cards, for example, or in the communities that have just the paper ballots to the Secretary of State's office in order to do that second round of counting. But it's not going to be an extended period of time in order to get these things done. And again, the clerks and the Secretary of State's office are more than capable of doing this. I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in them. I think the way they've handled the elections during this pandemic reflects their professionalism and capacity to do this work. And with that said, elections aren't certified until 10 days after anyway, so there is a period of time in which to do this. The second question was on the cost, and in the state of Maine, where they ran their first ranked choice election for Congress back in 2018, they had to do some software upgrades, which cost a total of $23,000. And then when they ran the election, there was an additional cost to run the ranked choice election that totaled around $100,000. So all in, it was about $130,000. I expect that we'll see something similar here in Massachusetts when we run our first ranked choice election in 2022. One fact is that there are funds that were appropriated by the federal government for election modernization, the so-called HAVA funds, that there's approximately $40 million available for Massachusetts if we want to use it for that. So to the extent there need to be any software upgrades or additional kinds of expenses, the funding is there for that, and it shouldn't be significant.
And Evan, we should probably just clarify for folks also which elections specifically, if the ballot question is approved by voters, which elections would it apply to going forward in Massachusetts? Yeah, so it'll apply to single winner races. So, municipal elections and races where there's you pick two and there's a runoff, those won't be affected. So state legislative races, the races for the state constitutional offices, so governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and so on. Congressional races, so the U.S. House races and the U.S. Senate races. So it would apply to all those races. And that would be for primary and general election. Right? That is correct. Yep. Okay, great. All right. Tom, do we have other questions coming in? Okay, we have another one for you, Evan. Definitely RCV is a hot topic this evening. Concerns about the relative complexity of ranked choice voting sort of being a deterrent to voters, maybe being somewhat intimidating. I've definitely heard this concern. So this is great that you get a chance to respond to it. Yeah, it's an issue that's raised from time to time. And what I look to is the data on how people have interacted with ranked choice voting and all the places that it's been used. So ranked choice voting has been used for more than 100 years in Australia, in various parts of the United States, in 20 some states in local elections, or in places like Alabama, they have it for their military and overseas ballots. Obviously up in Maine, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and other places, they've been using ranked choice for a long time. And the polling very consistently shows that voters find it to be simple, they find it to be easy, and they like it. So it's definitely different than what we do now. So it isn't to say that you can snap your fingers and all of a sudden, oh, we do it like this. So there's some education required. We've been certainly doing that over the last few years. The good news is
if this passes in November, we've got till 2022 to make sure people are up to speed on this. But just using plain old common sense, we rank things all the time in our lives. You go to Dunkin' Donuts, you know, if they've got this donut, I'm getting that one. If they don't have it, I'm going to get the next one. If they don't have that, I've got this third choice. And that's basically how ranked choice voting works. You know, as Americans, we're used to choosing between lots of alternatives. The one place we don't get a great opportunity to do that is in politics. So it's the reality is the data show that it's simple and it's easy and people like it.
And just to make sure folks understand, you don't necessarily have to register a vote for every candidate. So if there are 9 candidates and you have no clue about 4 of them, you can just leave those bubbles blank. You can just rank 1 through 5 in that case.
You could rank just 1 if you wanted to.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's very flexible. We have another question coming in from Carol Savage. Maybe which I think is getting at more the mechanics of sort of what would the ballot actually look like. So particularly if there's a lot of candidates. And obviously most ballots, you have multiple races as well. So maybe to speak to that, Evan, because it does create a little bit of a busier ballot.
Yeah, a little bit. So you'd have the vertical axis, you'd have the names of all the candidates, and then across the top, you'd have first, second, third, fourth, and so on. And then there'd be bubbles. So it'd be a little bit like the standardized tests that we all enjoy taking. But you fill in the bubbles the way you want, and then the machine scans it and it goes through. The one other thing I want to say about these 9 candidate races, people say, gee, that's complicated, but I think it's more complicated to have to pick one when you're trying to decide among 9 in a world where you'd say, I like this, and I want to be able to vote for who I really like without having to strategize about who I have to vote for, because I don't want to waste my vote because I only got this one shot. So it really improves that whole dynamic.
And one of the other benefits I think we've seen as well, right, is it tends to encourage greater diversity in the candidate pool as well. You don't have the so-called spoiler effect, so it tends to encourage more women to run for office, more people of color to run as well. And so do you want to just say a few words about that as well? Because I think that's another benefit of
it really is. And there's a lot of data that show that is the impact that it has in elections. More women, more people of color, lowers the barriers to entry, reduces that notion of, you see this happen in races very commonly where you have multiple candidates and you say, well, there's a women sort of lane and someone's got to consolidate around the one female candidate or the one of the people of color candidates, and it puts pressure on people to drop out as opposed to encouraging people to run. And the way it ought to be, I feel, in our state, in our country, is that if you want to run for office, you should run for office, and you should speak to what you think is important and not have to spend your time convincing people that it's a wasted vote and that someone else ought to be the person to carry the torch.
So do you mind if I jump in for one sec?
No, please, absolutely, Pam or Amanda.
So Common Cause is a strong supporter of Yes on 2 and ranked choice voting. And just on that point, I have seen too many times where candidates have been asked to actually remove themselves from a race because they're splitting the vote. We should never be in a position where we're telling people not to run for office. And I say we, it's a pressure from a community, it's a pressure from a newspaper, it's a pressure from a set of voters who like one and don't want their group to be split. But ranked choice voting gets rid of all of that. And it's the only thing that I have ever seen that, as Evan said already, reduces negative campaigning. And that's just a poison in our politics. And it really changes that dynamic so that you just don't want to piss off your opponent's supporters. And so it really reduces that substantially. And that is just so important, as well as giving voters more choices. And I think some people think that it is complicated, but it really is very as simple as 1, 2, 3. I'm very excited for this ballot question and working to make sure that it passes.
Okay. Tom, thank you. Do we have, okay, we have a question from Bob here, and I assume this is referring back to not the ballot question, but just regularly someone voting in the upcoming election. If they inadvertently vote twice, does need the ballot count? So I think the question refers to, right, if you did send your ballot in, presumably by mail, and, maybe you weren't sure if it was received, and you did go then in person and vote, what would happen? And this does come up, obviously, in when some people try to raise concerns about, election fraud. Obviously there are mechanisms to prevent this, but I think it's a good chance for you to speak to that. Probably you, Pam, address this.
So if you send in your ballot and it has already been received, when you go to vote, they'll say, no, I'm sorry, you can't vote because you've already cast your absentee ballot. If it has not been processed and they're holding it until later in the process, they will double check it against the list so that you will not have double votes. It's a whole process of checking in ballots when they process the absentee ballot. So we'll be counting them after Election Day, and those will be compared against the list of people who voted in person. So, we encourage people to go to trackmyballotma.com to see whether your ballot has been received, and to vote early, use the drop boxes so that this problem doesn't come up. But we do have protections in place to make sure that ballots are not double counted.
Great. So just again, to reiterate that point, to be crystal clear, we are very confident that our election system here in Massachusetts, and I venture to say around the country, hopefully this is true in other states as well, is make sure that somebody cannot cast more than one ballot. So let's move to our next question, and this is from Carol to Amanda. You had mentioned complexity as a barrier for young voters. So I think further suggestions or ideas that you'd have for campaigns, for how best to educate and engage young voters about issues. And I'm so glad Carol asked this because, I always struggle as well, and not just in a campaign, but now, once being in office, to find better ways and more ways to reach out to and connect with my younger constituents. So great. We'd love to hear more thoughts about that from you.
Yeah. Well, I think events like this are really great, events that are on social media and are accessible to people, where young people can just kind of tune in and watch and hear about voting, and things like infographics and just information on websites, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, other social media like TikTok, and having information about voting there is really important and really makes things more accessible to people. I also do think it's less educating about issues and more just educating about the political process in general, and how to vote, how to get a ballot, how when is the deadline for voter registration, when is the deadline to request your mail-in ballot. I think that those are some of the things that really present barriers to voting and to being engaged with the political process. And I also think that campaigns should engage with the organizing that's already kind of going on with young people. With things like the Sunrise Movement and the March for Our Lives and the Climate Strike are all really big organizations in Massachusetts that are led by youth, and the high school Democrats and college Democrats and young Democrats as well are all youth-led organizations. And so those organizations have already done a really great job of reaching people where they're at and getting their members involved. And so working with those groups can be a really great way of engaging young people in having them learn about a cause or issue. And there are all I guess these kinds of creative ways and strategies that to reach young people. Like, for instance, like one thing that we did on the Markey campaign with Students for Markey was Instagram polls. And so on Instagram, there's like an Instagram story that comes up, and like you can like post things on your story. And one thing you can do is like put up a poll, and you can make a poll that says, let's, for instance, like, are you supporting like Ed Markey, or are you going to be voting, or are you supporting Joe Biden? And like the people who look at your story can kind of go there and click yes or no. And then if they click, or it could even be like a more of a hard ask where it's yes and tell me more, and there's not even an option for no. And then that's kind of like a way of canvassing, but digitally, in a way that really is meeting people where they're at. And so then like you could go in and like go to all people who said yes, and then say like, when are you voting? Do you have a plan to vote? And have you requested your mail-in ballot yet? And you could and go to the people who said, tell me more, and have a conversation with them about why they're supporting this or that. And I think for really like reaching young people, it's best to do it in a way where young people are at the forefront of it, because young people understand other young people better than anyone else. And so investing in youth-led organizing is really the best way to get it done.
And you certainly proved that that was the case. I mean, with Senator Markey's reelection campaign, I mean, it was just phenomenal to see mobilization of young people, and obviously his championing of the climate for so long was a real motivator for young people. But it was great to see that. And I've also been really excited to see, as you mentioned, Amanda, the organizations that have been created in recent years that are led by young people. Sunrise, a great example, March for Our Lives, not just saying, there's some organizations out there already, and that's great, and we support them, but we're also going to step in directly and organize around these critical issues for our communities. So let me pose a question, maybe to you first, Pam, but Evan and Amanda, feel free to jump in as well. I guess a two-part question. First, for Massachusetts, again, we talked about unprecedented record turnout that we may be expecting. Never done mail-in voting before, except the state primary, but never done it in a general election on this scale. What are you most concerned about, for the election going smoothly in Massachusetts? What, if anything, should we be concerned about? Where could there be issues? And then the second part of the question is maybe even zooming back a bit to other parts of the country, particularly battleground states. What do you think we should be watching for and be concerned about in terms of the election running smoothly, in the weeks ahead, and obviously on election day?
So starting with Massachusetts, Massachusetts officials did a tremendous job in the primary. And that allayed a lot of our advocates' fears and how they would handle this onslaught of ballots. But let's be clear, they're still talking probably double the number of mail ballots that they or more that were cast in the primary, which is a lot of ballots. So they have extra time to process the ballots, and I think have been purchasing equipment. So some of our fears is just their ability to send out these ballots. So one thing to watch would be people that are getting their mail ballots late in the process. You can request a mail ballot through October 20th, but that's pretty late in the process. Because that has to get back to you, and then you have to send it back. What we have seen, which was something we were afraid, was that people wouldn't request their ballots early enough, but that generally has turned out pretty well. If you're a voter and you want to vote by mail, please do it. There is also an online portal where you can request an absentee ballot now. It is in the link that we sent, which is the Secretary of State's elections area. And that has a number of tools there, including an online voter registration tool, signing up to get an absentee ballot. They're all there. So in other states, I think we're in much worse shape. We have certainly the battleground states. There can be election administration that is more fractured than our state, and less political structures that are less interested in having people vote. Pennsylvania and Georgia are particularly problematic. Ohio has had a lot of issues. There's litigation after litigation after litigation. The numbers change as judges make decisions, then are overruled. We had systems going down in Pennsylvania. We had the voter registration deadline. It was yesterday. The system went down. It was extended to today. But I think that we also are potentially going to see challengers and people sending in the potential for intimidation. We've seen that in battleground states in the past. We've seen it occasionally in Massachusetts in an isolated way, but I don't think that will happen. We see lots of disinformation out there. Common Cause is running a big disinformation campaign where we train volunteers to scour social media and find inappropriate content that misrepresents the voting process. The classic is Democrats vote on Wednesday and Republicans vote on Tuesday, or, a picture that was just, we took a long time to get this one down, which was pictures of trays of ballots on the side of the road that said, these are election officials are throwing out Trump ballots. But that was just, had nothing to do with Trump ballots. They were just being staged to put in a truck. So we have a need for virtually, the disinformation campaign. We've been able to get Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and others to take down this content, but the damage can be done. I also expect a lot of problems after Election Day. I'm going to be like the cheery, the cheery person here, because we will not have vote counts on time. And that is a normal part of the process. Because we are moving as a country more and more to vote by mail, and many states, there were 17 that permanently accept ballots after Election Day, and now more than half of the states do, at least for 2020. We will not necessarily know the results on Election Day, and that's a normal part of the process. Some states allow ballots to go 10 days after the election, not just the couple of days of Massachusetts, and it's very much state by state. And I think that is going to cause, and certainly there's going to be a lot of agitation around that. But I think it's important for the listeners to know that that is a normal part of the process and to expect it. So I don't know what else you're looking for, but that's my 2 cents.
I think that's very helpful, and it is sobering, no question about it. But it's important that we are realistic and we know what to expect. And I know, organizations like Common Cause and so many others are working, super hard in Massachusetts and around the country to be prepared and to organize and to make sure the election goes as smoothly as possible. So did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I do, because we and a whole bunch of organizations led by Common Cause and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights have an election protection program, not just here in Massachusetts, but in all states, where there is a hotline staffed by legal volunteers, 1-866-OUR-VOTE, which is the English version, and there's also Spanish and various other lines, where any voter can call this line and get legal help, not like official legal, but volunteers, trained volunteers to answer their questions and to escalate any problems that can go everywhere from alerting someone to talk to the election officials, or to the Secretary of State, or even for us to go into court and prevent certain activities. So there will be volunteers across the country, especially in vulnerable polling places. Like in Massachusetts, we won't be at every polling place. We'll be roving around, but this hotline is live now, and it will be very, very active on Election Day.
Okay. All right. So Tom, let's take, maybe we have time for, one more question, and then, because I think we probably have gone through pretty much all the questions at that point, and then I'll ask our panelists maybe to leave us a final thought. All right. Let's see from Pat Kilty. My positions on ballot questions 1 and 2. Okay. Well, I'm happy to, we'll start with question 2, which of course you may have, if you joined us late, you may have missed the presentation that Evan Falchuk gave in describing ranked choice voting and how it works and what the many benefits are. And he convinced me. No, I'm kidding. I was already convinced before he reinforced my confidence in the position. So I am actually a strong supporter also of ranked choice voting. And in fact, proud to be the lead sponsor in the state Senate of this, essentially the same legislation that is going to be, on the ballot. So we were not able to move it through the legislature this session, although we made good progress, but it's on the ballot, and I'm pleased to be an honorary co-chair of the campaign, and appreciate all the work Evan and the whole team are doing, and I hope it'll be successful. On question number 1, to be honest with you, it's not an issue I have a lot of personal knowledge about, and it's not an issue that has come before the legislature in recent years. So I'm still doing my own homework, on it, and I'm probably right now leaning probably to a yes vote on question 1, but still doing my homework, and look forward to hearing from my constituents as well about your views on that. But I definitely have a clear position on question 2, and we'll be voting yes. All right, so let's wrap up here. We're coming on the hour, and I guess maybe we'll take each of our panelists in turn, and maybe just a final thought that you want to leave with our viewers. What you think is kind of most important for them to do when it comes to the election and voting in the days and weeks ahead. So maybe Evan, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're living in a challenging time. I think Pam really underscored the challenges we face. And one of my good friends who's been a supporter and also an endorser of ranked choice voting is our former Attorney General, Scott Harshbarger. And one thing he constantly tells me, and I think everybody in the emails he sends to people, is keep the faith. American democracy is worth fighting for. There are more of us who want things to be right and correct and proper than there are those who do not. They may be loud, they may be on television a lot, but they're outnumbered and they know it. So seeing huge voter turnout is the greatest thing that can happen in our country this year to be able to put things on the right track. And one of the reasons that I'm involved with ranked choice voting is I think it helps, again, to fix these problems in our democracy. We've got work to do to rebuild what we should have in our country, and this is a small part of it. So I'm honored for your support, Senator, and obviously Pam and Amanda. Hopefully you're supportive of voter choice as well, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight.
Super. Thanks, Evan. Let's go to you, Amanda, for any final thoughts you want to share with our audience.
Thank you so much, Senator Liz. And yes, I am a huge supporter of ranked choice voting. What I would just encourage everyone watching to do is to make sure to vote, to make sure you know everything about voting, and if you're requesting your mail-in ballot, to make sure to do that on time, and also to not be afraid to reach out to people to relational organize, to talk with them about the issues that matter to you, and get them involved in that way, which I think is just such a powerful form of organizing, and for people to get involved, not by voting, but also in other ways, to get involved with your community, to volunteer, to get involved with organizations you care about, to build build grassroots power within your community. And when working on campaigns, like the most rewarding thing is talking with voters and talking to people about the issues that they care about. And I think that it really is just such important and impactful work that more people should be involved in.
Amanda. All right, over to you, Pam, with you have the last word here.
Well, following two great closing comments, and I couldn't agree more with both Amanda and Evan. American democracy is worth fighting for, and it's worth participating in. And so that means both casting your vote and making sure that you and yours do that. But also, if you can and you're open and available, do some volunteering. It will make you feel more empowered, more involved, and will actually lower stress rather than increasing it. So volunteer for Yes on 2, do some phone banking, volunteer for election protection at protectthevote.net or something else. At the same time, that's another place, protectthevote.net. You can sign up for doing either on election day or the disinformation work or doing nonpartisan voter education. Or volunteer for a campaign, a political campaign of a candidate that inspires you. But get involved, and it will actually be better than feeling like that all these things are happening to you. And thank you so much, Senator, for hosting this forum. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Well, it was my pleasure. And again, thank you so much to Tom Dalton and Emily Grana from my office for helping organize and promote this event. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. And it is being recorded and will also be replayed on, obviously on available on Facebook, but also on local cable access channels for anyone who, didn't have a chance to join us. And thank you so much again to our panelists, Pam Wilmot, Amanda Westlake, Evan Falchuk. You were great and super appreciative of your time with us this evening. So thanks, everybody. Good night. Make a plan to vote and make sure you participate and your voice is heard in this upcoming election. Good night.
Thank you.